founder and director of the Contradiction Center. Today, we are delighted to have our very own Professor Tiffany as a guest speaker. Professor Tiffany is a senior lecturer at High School of Business at Berkeley, California. He teaches leadership, management, competitive strategy, business and public policy, global strategy, and management. But before being an academic, he actually consulted with several natural management consulting firms. Assistant to president of the large national financial services, and clients including people like Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, Johnson & Johnson, in Thailand also, so Pepsi Cola Thailand, Group C Bank, Stock Exchange in Thailand. Professor Tiffany is also writing. He's done many books. His current book that he's working on is called Dynamic Capabilities and 21st Century Management. So we keep an eye out for that one. He's done a lot of basically he's expert in strategy. And today, his talk is about entrepreneurial strategy. And is that a contradiction in terms? So without further ado, please welcome.
Not sure I need this, but I'll use it anyway. First of all, happy to be here. Thanks for those many kind words. You're all entrepreneurs. Some of you were in some of my classes here in the past, and I'm not going to change your grade. And some of you are currently in my class, and this will not help your grade. I'm sure. In fact, Jendra's uncle was also, the first year I taught here, I was in the class. The title, obviously, of the talk was meant to be provocative, but it does bring up, I think, some interesting issues. The introduction mentioned this book I've been working on. There's a professor, some of you have been in the class, I've spoken about this before, a guy at Berkeley, at Hospital, named David Teese. And David is actually from New Zealand. And David's been working on a concept for some years called dynamic capabilities. I think the dirty little secret, as they say, about strategy, it has one big problem. What's that? It doesn't work. Is that most of what we know about the traditional strategic tools simply don't work. The overwhelming proportion of strategies that are created by organizations, business firms, even Sasin, public institutions, they end up failing. They end up failing for a lot of reasons. There's no doubt about that. Well, what do you think a major reason that leads to the failure? Because again, the premise is that most strategies fail. Why is that? What would be some reasons you think?
They're static.
They're static. That goes into dynamic capabilities. If the tools, the analytical tools, are static, obviously the most well-known academic name in strategy. Some guy at a little school in Massachusetts, what's his name, of course? Michael Porter. And Porter, he's an economist by training, static equilibrium analysis. Alfred Marshall, the famed economist at Cambridge, came up with that concept back in 1920. But it can't account well for change over time. Entrepreneurs, all of you certainly have some interest or you wouldn't be here. You're interested in that. Maybe today we need disruptive strategy. Where Berkeley is, and all of you I assume know this, close to what? Silicon Valley. Essentially, every firm in the world today has a big red X on its back. And some 20-something kid in the valley is looking on how to take you down, how to disrupt. And Porter wrote strategy for a prior era when markets weren't changing that much, but we've seen a revolution in that. I don't want to go into detail about it now, but just very basically, this guy Teese, I think he's on to something, at least intuitively. There are three major components to his model of strategy: sensing, seizing, transforming. How does the strategist sense where markets are going? And most of you have taken classes, some of you in my own, and the standard textbook, oh, you do pest analysis, as it's called. Many of you know that. What's the political environment for P, economic environment for E, social, cultural for S, T, technological environment. Those are just lists, you check the box. How do you really sense? Seizing, and this is where many of you come to mind. How does once you sense an opportunity, what do you do to seize it, to take advantage of it, to monetize it? That's the entrepreneurial spirit. My favorite economist of all time, Joseph Schumpeter, an Austrian by birth who migrated to the US. And he's the one who celebrated the Schumpeterian hero. Who's that? The entrepreneur. The one, the larger-than-life individual who can break through the trends and make it happen. How do you seize? Then finally, transform. And this is the dynamic part. I think in today's world, we're not about to go back to a static equilibrium. There's so much change going on. So how does the firm optimize itself to change and change again? At some point, I'd be happy to talk about more details, but maybe not now. Obviously, I do think planning counts, and it's important, Judge Wright, because I want you to take the course, and I want to keep teaching here. It's a required course, so planning must be important, even though we know it doesn't work. Well, what do you typically do? I think some of you know one of the books I wrote, Business Plans for Dummies. In America, by the way, that's a bottomless market. There are a lot of people who fit that. But very traditional, step-by-step, etc. It's interesting, I think I can tell you this with some detail. I originally did that. I wrote a 2-volume planning manual for a government agency in the US. And I don't want to go into a lot of details because I'd have to kill you all later. But this agency, let's just call it the company. And I think we know that organization doesn't do very well in planning. And it's where I first began to realize that agency, oh God, CIA, it's nothing but a massive public bureaucracy. And it goes through the steps. It has planning manuals, but that isn't how it works. You learn the reality. Static is one reason they fail, but the other, equally if not more important, execution. What's the point of a brilliantly articulated strategy that can't be executed? Most strategies fail because they don't sufficiently incorporate the people problem. The people, I shouldn't say problem, the people advantage. And that's something where entrepreneurial approach does well. So the typical things you do, who's your market? What business are you in? Who are the competitors? How do you access? Do the pro formas, make the pitch, build the organization. There are so many books out there on creating a business plan. We all know that stuff, that they fail. But a question I want to raise, and all of these PowerPoints, by the way, are available. I'm going to leave them on there, and feel free if anybody, however you communicate. I'm more than happy to have you have copies of them. How rational is planning? Because it goes back to why they fail. Brilliantly articulated strategy that make sense on paper. How rational are we as human beings, especially in our economic activities? And we're learning constantly. Daniel Kahneman, the famed professor at Princeton who won the Nobel Prize in economics a little over 10 years ago. Yeah, somebody wins more or less every year. What's different about Daniel Kahneman? He's not an economist. He's a cognitive psychologist, the father of so-called behavioral economics. And he's created a revolution in economic thinking as we've come to realize that what economists do, mathematical modeling, mathematics, the purest of the sciences, isn't how most of us behave. We're not that rational. So a lot of these analytic tools, they're useful, but are they going to work? Are any of you familiar with Andreessen Horowitz? Many of you are familiar with Mark Andreessen. He was the creator of Netscape, and he has gone on to a very successful career with one of his colleagues who was at Netscape, Horowitz, and they have formed a VC firm. They're a top-tier firm in the Valley. They're not as well known as some of the others, Sequoia, Benchmark, whatnot, but they're doing very well. Last year, 2014, there were 803 venture capital firms in the United States alone. Time out, reflecting my ignorance. Are there many here in the kingdom? Are there VC firms here? You were saying not too many. A few years ago, not at all. Is there a VC industry here? Okay, some, but not 800 firms. These 800 last year, almost 50 billion US they distributed. Now, of that, there was a recent profile of Mark Andreessen, interesting guy. He said they get about 3,000 pitches a year come to them, and they're top tier. They only invest in 15 of them out of 3,000, only 15.005, really tiny. 10 of the 15 more or less fail to return the investment. 2/3 of the chosen ones. Of the remaining 5, 3 or 4 make it, they're viable. They'll return 5 or 10x the investment on that. Once in a decade, a little more, maybe less, a real super unicorn shows up that will return 1,000x, a Google, a Facebook. You start looking at this, so what do you know going in? Most of you are going to fail. That's simply the reality. The salmon, how do the salmon do it? They swim against the tide. Most of you are going against a powerful tide. And when we look at that, I think we have to start thinking, how rational? When I did that book, Business Plans, based on rationality, how you're supposed to do planning. But how often does a rational business plan work? This alone, it is a really, really difficult job out there. There are a lot of factors. And I don't have it up there. What might be the most important word in doing this? How do you say, Kendra, how do you say luck in Thai? Yeah, maybe that's the most important thing. Luck is involved on that. One of you here, who I know, her daughter is applying to top-tier schools in the U.S. And I remember reading something about that in the past. If you look at the Ivy, Stanford, some of the top schools, you look at them, they get a lot of applications, as you know, very low. But of those, maybe 10 schools bringing in 1,500 to 2,000 a year, you get down to the bottom 5,000 or 10,000 applicants. Everyone looks alike, literally. They have different names and facials, but you look at what they've done, the scores, the grades, the accomplishments, the letters. How do they end up selected? It becomes random. You get into the deal stream, into the final one. But after that, the Harvard director of admissions, he pointed out for years, he said, they take about 1,600 students. He said, we could take the next 1,600 who we didn't accept, and the next 1,600 who we didn't accept, and there's no difference from the 1,600 we did accept. They all look alike. And they end up with some degree of randomness or the whim of the admissions officer. Oh, in the band, we need somebody who plays the trombone, and let's get somebody who's LGBT this time. You know, they'll come up with something like that. They're just a whim. There's a lot of randomness out there. More good news, if you want to call it that. Many of you are aware, Yahoo was offered, Google, Page and Brin offered to sell themselves to Yahoo. Yang, nah, we don't see any future in that. And Andreessen, the name of the company is A16Z. Andreessen Horowitz, there are 16 letters in the name, A to Z, Andreessen to Horowitz. That's how their official website is, A16Z. A couple of years ago, they're an investor in Uber, but not much. They passed on putting in a relatively low stake that today is worth $3 billion. Uber is going to be the next super unicorn, right? It's already got a valuation of $50 billion US that they've collected, that they're getting in. And why did they pass? Well, who knows why? John Skelly of Apple, when he was running Apple in 1992, he launched the Apple Newton. Took the wrong timing. What essentially is the Newton today? A PDA, a personal digital assistant. It's the iPad. That the timing wasn't right. The idea was great, but there's a lot of timing. Kodak invented the digital camera in 1975, sold a license to Sony because they didn't think it. When Sony introduced the first digital camera, that has killed off Kodak. Microsoft had a very powerful internal project around 2000, 2001 that became big. It was a search engine. They turned it down because the powers that be at Microsoft were Office Suite and Windows, and they didn't want rivalry. So many things get in the way. We're aware of this. It's a failure. Decca Records, 1962. The manager of the Beatles, a new group, took them to them. We don't like their sound. Groups of guitars are on the way out. We won't publish their stuff. And of course, they become one of the biggest sellers of records, transformed music. Supposing it's 1970, we're the senior executive committee at IBM. Back then, the world's greatest firm. Everybody talked about GE. IBM was the big, massive firm before. And we're the senior executive committee, and somebody said, I did a little research, 1980, let's say, and I think I've spotted a potential competitor. If you were 1980, this is a complete and total, many of you have seen this slide, this is a complete and total Microsoft organization. What would have been the response? What did the first response? Laughter. The second response, call security. And if there had been any entrepreneurs at IBM, somebody would have said, let's find out where they're located and open a barber shop. We can make some money there. Nick, that doesn't apply to you. You're left out. But on this, and this was a firm, why were they, IBM did say, how do we make our decision? What do we use? How rational are we in doing planning? Many of you either going to do a startup, you've started them, have some interest. Is your decision making rational analytics or blindfold, turn around 3 times, throw a dart, and hope that you're close? How do we do this? Managing risk and managing uncertainty are very different. I'm not going to read this to you, but we've learned to deal with risk. Sam, you guys are good to see you. If you have some drums or something, a little drum roll, I was hoping for it. Sam is really a musician, as you know, masquerading as a business guy. Risk has been something we've dealt with for a long time. We've learned how to manage it. The example I often use, at the end of World War II, the UK was no longer the dominant power. Pound sterling wasn't going to last. The US convened a group in Breton Woods, New Hampshire, and created the modern currency system, and the dollar became the global reserve currency. Other currencies at the time, the D-mark, yen, French franc, after the war, the D-mark and the yen, and then French franc, Spanish peseta, they were fixed to the value of the dollar. Well, that helped. That created some certainty. But what happened? One epiphenomenon, after effect of Vietnam, the French started saying, we're not going to abide by this. The dollar, the regime fell apart. And around by 70 or 71, the fixed exchange rate system was gone. Well, especially with firms going abroad, there's enough risk. How do foreign markets want my product? How do I deal there? And it's compounded by currency problems. How did firms learn to overcome that? Some bright financial folks came up with hedging techniques. The way you hedge, just like in insurance policies, you know, to buy some limits on the upside and downside. We've learned, my point here, we've learned to manage risk, as risk is understood in the financial literature. But how do you manage uncertainty? That's a much tougher question. Because what many of you are looking at going into unknown businesses. In fact, Donald Rumsfeld, who I hate to admit was a fellow American, who was the Secretary of Defense that got us into Iraq and whatnot, but his famous comment, the unknown unknowns are the real problem. We don't even know what it is we don't know. How do you deal with that? This is much harder to deal with. And in today's world, constant change, age of disruption, how can you plan when much of planning is based on logic, on classical logic, on rationality, when there's a lot out there? Go back to some of those figures on Andreessen Horowitz, or getting your kid into college. At some point, all the planning in the world runs out. Somebody somewhere, in one form or another, let her in. No, don't let her in. It comes down to perhaps some of that. Oh, sorry about that. Maybe it was time on that. We'll just see in the session. If you look at decision theory, how we've done it, you can read this on your own, but Descartes, we're all reeds in the river, but we're rational reeds. The age of enlightenment, bringing systematic thinking. Prior to that, certainly in the West, all knowledge was what? Think of the Middle East today, the Quran. All knowledge was in the church, the Bible, and they controlled thought. But with the Enlightenment, people began to do experiments in Galileo and these revolutions, rationality, science began to emerge. This guy I mentioned, Frank Knight, he was the guy who created the concept of risk. He was a doctoral student at the University of Chicago. His doctoral dissertation, his professor on his committee said, this is brilliant. Immediately take your dissertation and publish it. And he created this notion of risk versus uncertainty, rationality. But we began to see it. Herb Simon, the first business school professor to win a Nobel Prize in economics at Carnegie Mellon, founded rationality. We are rational, but he said there are limits on it. And when he created those ideas in the 1950s, what was the new tool that he thought was the greatest thing ever invented? The computer. Why? You could do massive, what we would call today, deep dive in big database. The belief that, again, the world is rational. Things happen for reasons, and your job as a manager or a researcher, keep pushing, pushing, pushing to find out why does A lead to B under these circumstances, the scientific method. Get beyond correlation and find causation. What causes, not just because two things happen to occur simultaneously, that's correlation. What really drives it? The belief that we can understand things. Interestingly, another sidebar, I don't want to go into too long, is that where did a lot of this studies come from? The Cold War. The Cold War was really good for research because the government in the U.S. was pouring billions into research to defeat the Ruskies, the bad guys. A lot of it went into academia. Literally, the whole concept of management science came out of Defense Department spending. A guy who died a few years ago, Todd Haas, won the Nobel Prize for his work in game theoretics that was Defense Department spending. And we're familiar with that sort of stuff. Those were what? Mathematical, rational. And business schools. This guy, Herb Simon, he was the one who said, when you begin to look at business schools in the 1950s, he said, business schools are the toilets of academia. He said, these are awful, there's no scholarship. And it provoked a revolution in training, in teaching, where business schools went from being the bottom, the easiest measure to get your degree, became 20 years later by far the hardest to get into. Literally today, I think it's unfortunate in some respect. The top 10 business schools, nothing is harder to get into than those. And so many people today, in the past, they would have gone into medicine, into law, into science, technology. They all want to get MBAs today on that. Kahneman and Bernstein, Kahneman was at Princeton again, Bernstein was at Berkeley, and then Stanford. They came up with this notion, again, behavioral economics. Irving Janis, a famed social psychologist, groupthink. We began to learn more about how decisions are made. And with that, there was some belief that, yeah, there's more rationality. Well, the problem is what though? Just as behavioral economics is reshaping almost everything. Many of you are in academia, directly or indirectly, you've been there. And today, neural studies are transforming our knowledge of everything. That modern tools, the ability to understand how the brain works more and more, and how these processes work, is transforming everything on that. Something psychology is undergoing a change. Psychology used to be, how do you feel about that? You know, a Freudian sort of thing, get down, and now psychology has turned into literally a medical science in many respects. One of the things we're learning is what are all of us? We are what the chemistry says. You know, a question to ponder. Do you have a mind? What's a mind? Where's this at, the mind? Well, if we got a knife and start slicing open, you're going to have cells and neurons. Well, I didn't find the mind. I just found a bunch of cells and neurons. What is a mind? And the way that psychology is going today, evolutionary psychology as well, why do we behave the way we do? What do we find in most cases, most people? Fear of the unknown. Well, now think about that. Well, why is there fear of the unknown? Here's something. What is this? I'm not fearful of it, but when you think the unknown, evolutionary psychology said not only your physical characteristics, skin coloration, hair, all that, body physiognomy, those were genetic. You can look at your parents and you find you are. Evolutionary psychology says also our ideas, concepts evolved over time. Why fear of the unknown? Prehistoric times, mankind evolving out of the animal kingdom. Oh, look at that, there's an interesting animal. Oh, you're dead. We learned that the unknown can kill us. And over millions of years, hundreds of thousands, not millions, that's become part of it. When you're in a business environment, something unknown, most people are fearful of that. It's interesting, as entrepreneurs, you love that. Why? Because this fear of the unknown, resistance to change, what does it correlate with more than anything? What factor? Age. Age. And a lot of it, learning how behavior works. Chemistry. The example, Chinjira, I think I used it in the class she did currently. So I go to the UK, go to London, I rent a car, and I have to go somewhere. I get at Heathrow and I rent a car. What do I have always? The cleanest windshield or windscreen, as Nick would call that, in all of London. Why? Well, where am I sitting? I'm an American, right? Where am I sitting on the car? Not where you sit. I'm on the wrong side. So there's a degree of discomfort, right? And then I come to one of those really stupid things called a roundabout. And where the hell is the traffic signal, these roundabouts? So I'm on the wrong side, I'm tense, and I'm going to turn around. Why did I do that? Yeah, I didn't think about it. It was a chemical reaction because I'd done it so often. The five senses: visual, audio, touch, smell, and hearing. We have these senses. The senses, the way the brain, the neurons in there through the eyes, they pick up that thing, it comes in. There is a neural pathway reaction that causes me to do that without thinking. Why? I've done it so often. What's one of the problems as people get old to change? Literally, you're asking the person to reprogram their brain, to change the brain chemistry of how signals come in and are turned into some physical action because of the way that goes on. And older people have reinforced the neural pathway so deeply, you don't just, oh, I'm going to change. Now, these are generalizations. Some people can do it, some can't. But it takes time. It's harder to do. These things are changing what we know about how things work. And again, they're undermining a lot of the notion life is a rational process. There are other factors that come in of why we, do what we do. We do know non-negotiable, left brain, right brain. That is not just some glob up there. First thing is emo. Emo, if I had a hammer, is that a song by Peter Paul and Mary? No, he would know. But if I had a hammer and I whacked you in the front of the head right there, Sasin say, good, hit him on the other side too. No, but if I whacked him hard in the front, I would probably disable certain neural functions. If I hit you on the backside, other neural functions that we have found through, unfortunately, head trauma to people, very specific parts of the brain are engaged in very specific cognitive processes. It's not all one thing. And in general, the two lobes, left brain, right brain, and this is fairly well accepted by neurosurgeons, physiologists, and others. The left side is where analytic, serial, logical, objective processes occur. The right side, global, parallel, emotional, subjective. Very few people that research shows are evenly balanced. You tend to be more one side or the other. You know, one of the interesting ones, now that I think about it, is a good doctor here is balance, one of the things. But accounting, tax, lawyer by training, but music. But interesting, I mentioned this guy, Herbert Simon, who was at Carnegie Mellon, one of the top computer science schools in the world. Also, one of the top music schools in the world. Because a lot of people who are in quantitative math, those things are really good at music as well. There's a logic perhaps to some aspects of music. They see that. But most of us tend to be one side or the other. What's one of the problems in business? You have to, if you want to go into business school, you have to take the GMAT. What is the GMAT test for? Left brain capabilities. Where's the creativity? Take something like new product development. What's the failure rate of new product development? 90%, 95%? Because we bring rational planning to bear. Many of you who have business training, that's what you've been taught to do. See the world through the lens of rationality. But what are we learning? We're not that rational in terms of mathematic rationality. We make decisions in other ways. Evolutionary psychology then, gut choice. Are any of you familiar with Malcolm Gladwell? I'm sure a lot of his work has been translated probably in Thai, but he's an interesting guy. He's a Jamaican, actually, Canadian citizen, writes for the New Yorker, and is not an academic, but he reads academic journals and rewrites it for the big public and gets about $40,000 for a talk, which is about $40,000 more than I'm getting. But anyway, he writes stuff. He really is interesting stuff. You've met the person of your dreams. Oh, finally, this is the person for me. Think of that. And you met that person. And how long does it take you, when you think about it, to say, yes, this is the right person for me? Is it 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years before you say, yes, the right person? How long? This was some research that Gladwell wrote about in blank. How much time? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. When people do that, what do we say those people have that attracted them? They have obviously chemistry, and in fact, that's what it had. There is a chemical reaction that you hopefully will all find that someday. Maybe 2 minutes. Maybe that's why the divorce rate is 50%. But yet, that some of you hopefully have had that at least once in your life. You're just transported. It's an almost out of life. You've undergone a chemical reaction. You know, I mention this sometimes to students out of part. They don't like it, that's total bullshit. Emil is kind of a nerdy, mathematical computer type. But on Fridays, he goes out, throws down some brewskis, some beers. Why wait till Friday? Let's just do it every night, as the Germans would say. But he throws down some beers and suddenly, hey, sweetie, you want to go out? Let's go out and have some fun. What's happened? What does he introduce into his brain? Chemicals. Alcohol is a chemical. And literally, what did it do? It altered his behavior. The introduction of chemical into the bloodstream changes how you behave. We're learning so much again about this. How do people behave? Because at the end of the day, you have ideas, you have plans, you want to sell something new. What's the connection? Are some of you going to have some intuitive BFO, blinding flash of the obvious? It just came there. Or no, I have to sit down, get the paper out, do the calculations, make equations. That a lot of it is there's something intuitive, and you shouldn't discount those, because I think a lot of successful entrepreneurs are into their right brain side. They respond intuitively. They don't have to do that. How many of you have made a pitch to a VC? That certainly have done that. What do VCs invest in? Sam? They invest in people. Like that one of the first slides on recent orders. They see 100 ideas a day. But how many people do they see that, you know, this person really can make it work? Okay, then how do you draw that conclusion? Part of it, what's your track record? But you've got a younger person there, a lot of it today, somebody in their 20s. What are they looking for? What are they looking for in that person? Because the ideas, there's a lot of good ideas, you have thousands, they all look good. It's like getting somebody into a class. What are they looking for in that person? The commitment, put another word on it, because that's right. Passion on that. And I think it's one thing you've learned, that how passionate are you about your idea? And if you're not, somebody's going to see right through it. They're going to see that, well, I think this is a really good idea, and some of you might be interested in it, please, sort of thing. Nobody's going to invest in you, passion to you, and not faking it, but really doing. And where does that come from? A lot of you, it's just there, it's who you are. You have a feeling for that. How do you hire? I did work some years ago with Morgan Stanley in their retail stock brokerage business. At the time, they had 500 branches in the United States. They had about 15,000 Series 7 brokers. The SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, if you want to sell stocks and bonds, you have to be licensed. You get a Series 7 license, 15,000. They were bringing in a lot of them. They were spending, and this is around 1990, late 90s, they were spending about $100 million a year in recruitment and training to do that. 80% of the people they hired were gone within 3 years. Because you have to build a book, as it's called in that business. They give you a salary, but it's a commission basis. So after 3 years, you're on your commissions. 80% were gone. They couldn't do it. And I surveyed the 500 branch managers. On what basis do you choose a person to come in and join, to be a trainee? And these are trainees, brand new people. Well, we do telephone tests, because I don't know how it works here, but in the U.S., a lot of retail brokerage is so-called dialing for dollars. You do cold calls. So telephone, how's that? You know, they have all this rational stuff. The brokers who had the best, the branch managers who had the best track records, who the ones they hired were most successful, there was nothing rational. It was intuitive. They had some little intuitive way. One guy, remember, he had a very good record of hiring. He said, I would set up, we get resumes, you get a lot of people, you sort through the obvious ones, you just throw away bad ones. But those look pretty good, but we're down to this, who do you know is going to be good? I'd invite him in for interviews. I'd say, come in at 4 o'clock and see me for an interview. And he would tell his personal assistant, secretary, tell him I'm busy. And when they keep telling him I'm busy. And he says, I'll see him an hour afterwards. Those who are still there, he would talk to. Because a lot of them, they get up. Who wanted, they stay. Well, he can't see you right now, he's busy. Okay, they'll sit there. Now, that little dumb thing, for him, it worked. He was able to sort through who really wanted to do it. Now, where did that come from? He didn't read it in some textbook or something. He had some insight about how to hire, how to do that. Where do you get your ideas? Where are they coming from? How much are you, for the pitches, the new stuff you want to do? Great, thank you. And my point here, if you have two eyes and two legs, rationality and emotion, you go around like this, hopping on one leg. Why we have to start bringing in that other side, what let's just call it the non-rational side. Business school, we don't want to hear that because otherwise, why would you waste your time getting a degree? Unless, where did Bill Gates get his MBA? Oh, he didn't. Where did he get his first degree? No. Steve Jobs, MBA? First degree? Michael Dell? No. So as I tell my students, why are you here? When we're finding a lot of these people have been quite successful because they have passion, intuition, something, and they've done quite well on that. Real quickly on this. Is music, the appreciation of music, is it random? This tells you the total amount that goes into hit movies and songs, 5,000 movies made, 15,000 screenplays, average film cost in the U.S., and this was 7-8 years ago, 90 million, including marketing. Under 5% of the output makes money. What's the strategy of a VC essentially? It's the same thing as probability theory, that you just don't know which one. You narrow it down, but you don't know which one. Star Wars was passed on essentially every studio in Hollywood said, are you kidding? These costumes in this space for kids, that won't work. 20th century, reluctantly, under pressure from some people that push them, they distributed $20 billion. $1 million is still, the toys sell $1 million a day. If you read anything about Lucas recently, Lucas sold to Disney. Since he sold, 2 years ago? On paper, he's made $3 billion from on that. But everybody turned down Star Wars. Epagogix is a firm, and they claim they can test scenes in a movie if they're going to sell tickets or not. That producers will bring the movie to them, they subject every frame, they look at the music, the intonation, the color of the things, of the backgrounds, and they can predict, for a mass market, will this sell well or not? So maybe there's some, again, understanding how we decide things. And they've had a fairly good record on that. And you can Google Epagogix to learn some more about them. So, back at the end here, how rational is this exercise that we go through? How much of a role should rationality play when you're trying to obtain money, do business planning, come up with ideas? What is the word of the day in the VC world today? Pivot. Sam, what do they invest in? VCs? People. Most new plans fail. But good people, you've got a plan that's rational. What are they able to do? Information's coming in. It kind of trashes their idea, but they're smart enough. Oh, look at this. This is what, and they're able to pivot rapidly. That's become a big term in the Valley, certainly in the VC world. People who are smart enough, intuitively, to see something else and able to make the quick move to get into where that opportunity leads. Say, oh, no, my plan, I did the plan and I had all the mathematicians better, so I'm going to say about the plan. That the ability to pivot, and that's primarily an intuitive thing. So, end of story here, and unfortunately, leaving, the dean is having a dinner with a potential school that we want to work with, and I'm going to go to dinner with them. But what I want you to think about, again, that planning, rational, intuitive. The needle doesn't go one way or the other totally, but in the academic world, it's gone way over to rationality. And what's the result? Let's go back to where I started. Most strategies do what? They fail because they don't sufficiently take into consideration execution, dealing with people that is not that rational of a world. Very simple at the end of the day. Not sure if you got anything out of it, but again, you're not here, you're here to meet each other, to do some networking, to make your pitches. Happy to have your attention. Good luck to all of you. And again, I'm leaving. They're on the hardware, they're on the desktop. Feel free to use them.
Thank you. It is unfortunate the professor has to leave, but you all can join me outside for some drinks and some pizza. Okay, just
Again, maybe I'll stay.
Thank you.
Thank you.